Hawks Zone Rundown continues. Today we have special guest Gregg Bell joining us from the Tacoma News Tribune. Gregg's a beat writer for the Seattle Seahawks, and he's been down at camp the entire time. And it's awesome to have Gregg on just before he flies out to Tennessee. And the Seahawks get together with the Titans, and they're going to have a joint practice. So, yeah, we're going to talk about that, talk about the game over the weekend, see what Gregg liked about it, what he thinks they can improve on, just the overall vibe at camp and how Mike McDonald is having this team respond. And we're going to get into a bunch of other things. Bryce, I'm excited about this episode, man.
Yeah, man, it's going to be great to have Gregg on just before he heads down to Tennessee and kind of joins up on those joint practices and gets that kind of vibe. And also to touch on just all the stuff that's been going on. He's been around this team for a long time, so it'll be interesting to see his point of view on the Mike McDonald era and how different it is from the previous.
Yeah, I can't wait to get into it with Gregg. Guys, if you like what you're watching on the channel, you've been around and you haven't subbed yet, go down and hit the subscribe button for us and hit the notification button and the bell so you don't miss any future episodes, because we're getting right into it now. We are coming at you live after every preseason game, and that's going to continue throughout the season too. And also awesome guests like Gregg today. So on the other side, Gregg Bell.
Well, I'm the best corner in the game.
Look at this run. What a run. Marshawn Lynch. Get off me.
DK.
Yes, sir.
Hey, it's John Schneider with the Seattle Seahawks.
And Washington's got a lead. Leo Wilson to catch. Jackson, Smith, and Jimbo. The Seahawks are going to host the NFC Championship.
Every year, the NFL does. Is it going to be
another 9-8?
Players who've got to finish something.
They have to fix the offensive
part of his success and part of
ambition of being the LOB
want to hear. That's trading DK Metcalf.
Play him aggressive.
This is the Hawks Zone Rundown with Ryan and Bryce.
Gregg Bell joins us back on the show once again. Gregg writes for the Tacoma News Tribune and covers the Seattle Seahawks. Gregg, we appreciate you coming back on the show. We know you're busy with camp and you're flying out here today to go down to Tennessee, but we appreciate you coming on and talking Seahawks with us today.
Thanks for having me, guys. Ryan, Bryce, good to talk to you again. It's been an interesting camp already. I mean, the study of Mike McDonald is fascinating to me. His leadership at 37 years old, first-time head coach. Every day I'm watching how he interacts with the players, how he's motivating them, getting them buy-in. He's very direct. He holds a standard that is very known. It's public. You're talking study after it being one way. It's definitely different.
Yeah, absolutely. Touching on that, Gregg, Bryce and I is one thing we noticed for, watching the preseason game. We'll get into that a little bit, but just watching Mike on the sideline, like Bryce and I were saying, this guy looks like, he's been doing it already for 5 years. You just look composed, and like you talk about the buy-in. That was the biggest thing that we noticed, was just the players just seemed like they were buying in, and everyone, on defense rallying to the ball, and everybody's on the sidelines, whether it's Spoon or Leonard Williams, and hyped up for the fourth string guys. And it just felt like guys, Mike had these guys ready to go on Saturday night there. What was your feeling there?
Well, one thing is nobody's really gotten smacked in the mouth. None of the starters have, and they haven't lost a game yet. So the buy-in's pretty easy, because if you want a job this time of year, you got to do what the coach says. The rubber meets the road when you're playing regular season games and losing, and you're playing in San Francisco and getting smacked in the mouth. So that'll be the truer test. So right now, yeah, you should have buy-in if you want to make the team for a new coaching staff. But I don't know how much the television broadcast showed McDonald on the sideline, but in the stadium on Saturday in Inglewood, I kept my binoculars trained on him most of the game. And when there was something that happened, I would immediately, after the big hit by Kevon Wallace, I went straight to McDonald. After the touchdowns, both touchdowns, Brady Russell's touchdown and George Holani's touchdown, I went straight to McDonald. He was stoic. He was the same, pretty much expressionless the whole time. He was just pacing up and down the sideline. He had teammates and coaches coming up and tapping on the back and jumping around about how the success they were having on these plays. And McDonald gave this air of, yeah, I expect this. This is how we're supposed to play, and this is the way the results are supposed to be. So I asked him after the game, did you expect the defense in particular, with the 0 for 7 on third downs to begin the game, 6 drives of 5 3-and-outs and a 1-play interception, and the Chargers getting just 16 yards in their first, or 21 yards in the first 16 plays or whatever it was. And he said, yeah, this is how we expect to play. We're supposed to be this, and if it's not, we're going to fix it. And that's how he thinks, is that there's a standard, and you either live up to it or you don't. And he publicly talks about players who aren't. He thought Tyrese Knight, for instance, has a long way to go. He's said on the very first rookie minicamp that his number 1 draft pick needed to get in better shape so he could get through an entire practice. He said in the first days of training camp that Byron Murphy had to be better than he was the first couple of days, and that Murphy wasn't as good as he thought he would be. He should have been in the first couple of days. Obviously, they're unhappy with Oluwatimi and the moves they made at center and bringing in Connor Williams. He's got a standard, and if you don't reach it, you hear about it. And it's a direct the players are so far responding to in a positive way. It's working. They still don't have everything installed. The offense isn't all the way in. The defense isn't all the way in. There's still work to do. We mentioned Connor Williams. He's got a lot to learn here in the next 2.5, 3 weeks before the season gets started. But it's so far so good, to say the least. And most of all is the buy-in and response he's got from the players.
So, Greg, like, kind of just, you talked about the Chargers game and just how different is training camp this year compared to obviously the predecessor in Pete Carroll, like just the vibe around camp and everything like that. Like, is it drastically different slightly, or is it like, how is it?
It's quite a bit different. There's a lot of teaching. There are a lot more one-on-one pass rush, pass protection drills than there used to be in the past. They aren't tackling guys to ground except for the one day they were out at Lumen Field and they had the Saturday afternoon practice that 3s went against 3s and actually took guys to ground. That's the only time I've seen that in a generation in Seattle. But the teaching is Scott Huff in particular. If you want to watch a Scott Huff line drill, he is teaching just the eaches of everything and stops the drill and walks them through and shows them where their hands should go. And 10-year veterans like Laken Tomlinson are taking notes and stopping and asking Scott Huff questions. And then the physicality piece of the line of scrimmage is definitely higher than it has been. They scrimmage more 11 on 11 than they used to. A great portion of the practice is that. They do a lot of one-on-one defensive back, cornerbacks against wide receiver drills outside with the quarterback throwing more than they did in previous camps. They have a lot to install, and the whole time they're doing it, they have this baseline of physicality that they want to maintain throughout it all. And the physical piece of it, while not bringing guys to ground, everything else is more physical than it's been in previous years.
Yeah, Greg, you mentioned Scott Huff and that O-line. I know last time we had you on, it was a couple months back, and we talked about how they have to fix this offensive line. Like it's been an issue for a long time now, and especially at that center position where it's been a revolving door for the last decade. Connor Williams officially at camp now, and then the signing of some veterans. You mentioned Tomlinson, and seems like there's a nice mix of vets with some young guys. Christian Haynes, obviously, that we drafted. So kind of touch on your thoughts on Connor. Like, do you see that as a nice, obviously it's a boost for the line, but how confident are you now with the combination of Scott Huff and some of the players now that we've accumulated on this line? I know Abe Lucas is a big question mark, but what's your confidence level overall now with this line moving forward?
It's still unknown, and I don't think that anything's definitive, especially from the center onto the right side. The only short things are Charles Cross is going to be your left tackle, and Laken Tomlinson is going to be the left guard. And again, Tomlinson's only on a 1-year deal. Everything else is up in the air. Yeah, Connor Williams has been a very good player in this league and a starter for 6 years, but 4 of those were at left guard. The last 2 have been at center, and the second of those 2 years was cut short after 9 games with an ACL tear. A 300-pound, they list him at 320, and by the way, he did not yesterday look 320. He looked like about 280. He looked 6'5" and almost slim for a lineman. But a 300-pound guy coming off an ACL 8 months ago is no sure thing. You just don't throw him in and start playing him. There's a lot that he has to prove, and to himself, first of all, that the knee's fine. He hasn't done anything in cleats in a football manner, and he may not do that again till the last week of August. And now all of a sudden you're one install week and one game plan week, and you're playing your first game. The plan is that Williams plays in that first game, but I don't think that's a slam dunk sure thing. He doesn't even know how his knee's going to respond to one practice over the next day after day. So they still have questions there. They obviously don't like Oluwatimi to be the guy this year, or else they never would have made this trade, and they wouldn't have traded Nick Harris on Sunday back to the Browns. The right guard situation has been Anthony Bradford so far, but all spring it was McClendon Curtis, who's now playing right tackle, splitting time with George Fant. Fant's the number one right now, but Curtis has played a good bit of the training camp alternating with Lucas or with George Fant at right tackle. Abe Lucas is nowhere, to us, doesn't seem anywhere near practicing than he did a month ago. I see him doing straight line drills and conditioning drills, pushing a sled in the indoor facility after practices, and that's it. And he comes out and watches practice in flat shoes and gym clothes. And here we are on August 15th or mid-August, and he's not back playing football. They thought he'd be back from this offseason knee surgery a long time ago. Mike McDonald acknowledges that. So they can't count on him being available for the start of the season. They didn't sign George Fant to be an everyday starter at right tackle. He was supposed to be a swing backup left and right tackle. So I just mentioned 60% of the offensive line. It still has some question marks, and we are 3 weeks essentially before the season opener. Scott Huff has the toughest job on this team as a new line coach, installing what he wants to install, teaching what he wants to teach, and settling on 5 guys. And the guy they really want, Abe Lucas, might not even start the season there. It's the one piece of this team, the biggest piece of this team, that the success of Geno Smith and the offense rides on, that's the most unsettled.
Greg, in regards to the Connor Williams signing, so obviously we know, and when we talked to you a couple months back, we talked about how, like, ever since the Max Unger trade, the center position's been a revolving door in Seattle. Every year we've had a new starter, basically. Do you think Connor Williams is the stop to that, or is he just a stopgap for this 1 year? Like, do they really seem to like Olu, or is Olu even a guy that's potentially not in this regime's long-term plans? Like, is that still a position that we're up in the air with?
Yeah, it is, because they don't know what Connor Williams is for their system. They've never seen him play and practice in it. He hasn't even practiced yet. And as a matter of fact, he's 8 months out of an ACL. We don't even know how his knee is going to be. Can he practice 1 day in 2 days in a row? Can he practice 5 days in a row? Can he play a game and then come back and play a game 7 days later? They don't know that. Now, the agent and everybody's saying it's great, his medical tests are great, but they haven't yet to see it. And if there's one position on the team, not just the line, the team that needs some ramp-up time in learning and communicating with the rest, it's center. They're asking him to do a lot if they think he's going to start the opener. And I'm not saying he won't, but it's just not a rubber stamp that Connor Williams has fixed their problem at center. Connor Williams might not even have fixed Connor Williams' problems yet. He doesn't know if his knee's going to respond and how that's going to go from his ACL tear. He's 27. He's on a 1-year deal. It's $3 million guaranteed, so he's playing, and it's up to $6 million. If they wanted Oluwatimi and they liked him, Connor Williams wouldn't be here. Nick Harris would still be the backup. Oluwatimi would be the starter, and they'd be rolling with Oluwatimi to begin the season. So obviously they're not trusting Oluwatimi at this point, but they still have him for 3 years on rookie contract, which is why you trade him, or you don't trade him, you trade Nick Harris instead. So the answer long-term, they'll find that out here in the next few months. If Connor Williams is what he was in Miami, then they will offer him a multi-year deal at bigger money. But he couldn't command that coming off 8 months after an ACL, which is why he signed a 1-year deal for Prove-It, because nobody in the league was going to sign him to that kind of money. They need the beauty of Oluwatimi in the draft choice and going into this training camp was they could possibly have a consecutive year starter at center, which they haven't had since Justin Britt in 2017-18. But remember, Britt failed at 2 other positions before he got that job at center. So they haven't had a true homegrown center since Max Unger, 2014. And we all know where he went in the trade to New Orleans for Jimmy Graham. Connor Williams is going to be the 10th center starting in 10 years if he takes the job for week 1. That they flat out kicked the can on that position. They paid other spots instead of center. They didn't draft at center at the top of the draft like they could have. They took D. Eskridge, for instance, instead of Creed Humphrey. I hate to keep bringing that up. They made choices at other places besides center, and now they're trying to Band-Aid it with Connor Williams off of an ACL. Of course, they have faith that he can be the guy he was, but we don't know. We haven't seen that yet.
Yeah, I mean, and like you said, the reason why he stayed on the market as long as he did. Greg, kind of sticking with the offense, a lot of good things, coming out of Saturday for the first preseason. What was your overall thoughts with Sam Howell and the way he played? It seemed like, Ryan Grubb sort of set him up for success. A lot of quick hitters, some bubble screens. They ran the ball, a nice mix there. Considering how much criticism he's had at camp because he just didn't look good. Were you surprised? How decent kind of Sam came out and played on Saturday there?
No, it was a very vanilla scheme, and the Chargers were terrible. Their second and third team is barely NFL quality. I was really surprised at how bad the Chargers were across the board on every facet of the game with their reserves. They did start 4 of their 5 starting offensive linemen in that game, so it wasn't like it was all JVs. But yeah, Grubb kept it very simple. He wanted to get the ball in Laviska Shenault's hands early so he could break tackles and see how he is as an open field ball carrier. And that's why you saw the bubble screens and the fly sweeps. He gave a fly sweep to Eskridge for 22 yards that George Alani had a great block on. I have been surprised at how inaccurate Sam Howell has been at training camp. And he was even inaccurate at game. Yeah, numbers were 16 for 27, 130. The touchdown pass was a check down route that his tight end, Brady Russell, broke 2 tackles to get in the end zone for. Not to take it away from Howell, but that wasn't a dart into the end zone, for instance. He had a pass out in the flat to Russell that forced him to dive and fall into the ground, and there was nobody in the flat. It should have been an easy catch, and it would turned into a no gain because he threw it into the ground. I thought Holani should have had a touchdown on the pass in the flat on 2nd and goal on the series. They ended up not scoring on it. I thought the pass led him into the sidelines and caused him to run out of room and not able to plant his foot and turn his shoulders upfield and get to the goal line. That's why he went out at the 1-yard line. If that throw's stuck between his numbers, he puts his foot in the ground, he gets to the goal line for a touchdown. So it's accuracies like that. The difference in accuracy between Geno Smith and Sam Howell is stark. I mean, Sam Howell is not threatening at all for meaningful snaps from Geno Smith. It would take an injury, and a major one, for Howell to get any meaningful playing time. And I've said, written this, it's still true today here on August 13th. Sam Howell is closer to competing to P.J. Walker for the number 2 job than he is for any meaningful snaps this season. We'll see. Geno Smith's going to bulk of the starter reps in the joint practices here the next 2 days in Nashville. Geno Smith's preseason is these next 2 joint practices. He's not playing. So Mike McDonald said he's not playing in the preseason game on Saturday. So few starters are probably going to play, which means Sam Howell will probably be more with the number 2s on Saturday in Tennessee. The interesting thing about all this, guys, is this time next year, think about it, if this goes according to plan this season and Geno Smith is healthy and plays decently well to good, he's going to get all the starts, right? So Sam Howell, the only thing they're going to have to go on are these training camp practices and these preseason games to decide if he could be the quarterback of the future. And once again, both quarterbacks' contracts end after 2025. So they need to make a decision based on these training camps and preseason games. And I can tell you from being at every one of the 15 practices so far, he is way off at times. I mean, 5-10 yards off, wide of receiver, especially outside the numbers. His accuracy outside the numbers has been very off, and it's sometimes concerning. So he's got a long way to go, and he may get there. Remember, he's learning an offense as well as he's throwing one right now.
Right.
But yeah, he's generally been pretty off.
In regards to Sam Howell, Greg, I've been following what you've been saying on KJR on your show and how he's been the one quarterback that's ever hit the Boeing sign consistently that's sitting way outside the field. The one thing I will say in the game that at least I took away that was a positive for Sam Howell, I guess, and I agree with you on the accuracy on some of those flat passes, like they were horrible. he didn't force anything when he got into panic situations that he would have done last year, which I thought was he threw the ball away. He kind of learned to live, and I think that's a testament to Grubb and the QB coach London and working with him on his decision making, because I feel like Sam Howell last year would have tried to keep that play alive and possibly turn the ball over by throwing an interception. So at least I see some progress, but I agree with you. Like from what I saw when I was at the Lumen game at the Fan Fest and watching PJ Walker and him, like it's not very big gap between the two of them. It's pretty close in some aspects, and so it'll be interesting to see what they do next year. But speaking on the offense a little bit too, how different is Ryan Grubb's system to what you've seen past offensive coordinators run in Seattle? Because everyone keeps talking about how he's porting everything over from the University of Washington, and it was pretty vanilla in the game on Saturday. But what have you seen at practice? Is it drastically different, even like how he orchestrates the offensive side of the ball at these training camp practices from the past offensive coordinators?
It is. And I'll tell you one player that when I watch at practices makes it show that Ryan Grubb is so different, and that's Jackson Smith-Njigba. Smith-Njigba last year was among the leaders, had the fewest target yards in the league for most of last season. It was like 2.8 or something for most of the season. He was bubble screens and hitches and things out of the slot. Ryan Grubb is doing none of that. It's 11 go, and he is down the field. And Grubb's offense is predicated on layered patterns. He wants to have crossers in front of safeties' faces to make the safeties have to choose, and then they send deep outside with the outside receivers behind it, hoping that the safeties come up and put a cornerback in a spot deep one-on-one with Metcalf and Lockett. It's how Washington did it for games over games and for 2 seasons. Smith-Njigba is going to be a big part of that deep, making the safeties put them in a bind and choosing which receivers to go. They'll run hitches and they'll run bubbles, but not to the preponderance that Shane Waldron did. And it is not just going to be DK Metcalf as the home run threat in this offense is what I'm trying to say. You're even going to have Noah Fant running down the seam, deep routes, putting safeties in the decision box. And so the vertical passing game is the biggest stark difference that I've watched in training camp. The deal is with that, of course, guys, is it takes time for a guy to run a 40-yard route, time that their offensive line has not given their quarterbacks for years. So if they have an offensive line that they can finally settle on, and it's good enough to run block enough to set up play action passes that Grubb loves to run. I mean, people forget Dylan Johnson was a 1,200-yard back for that team in Washington. And everyone thinks that all Grubb did was send Penix down and back and throwing 40-yard routes to Adunze and McMillan. That's not how Washington won. They won by establishing run, making play action a really viable threat, and teams having to defend both sides of run and pass defense. Can Seattle's offensive line do what Washington's did? Washington had the best offensive line in college football. The Seahawks have had one of the worst offensive lines in pro football for years. That's how important Scott Huff and his guys are. And that's why I'm saying how all of this is predicated on this offensive line play. Looks great in practice, though, guys, because nobody's hitting the quarterback, and they're letting the receivers run through the routes and the plays. So it looks great, and it's very vertical in practice. We'll see when the games get real how vertical it can be with this offensive line. But the verticality and the length of the receivers, the depth of their routes is going to be a lot different this year.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the offensive line, and it is interesting because there's a lot of what if still. Like you said, if Connor hits, you potentially get your center for a few years to come, and then if Abe gets right, there's your bookends, and you're starting to feel pretty good. But if it doesn't, then you could find yourself in a similar position with the line the last few years, and that's sort of the big unknown going into this year. So, but kind of sticking with it, obviously you mentioned the run game. We got to see a little bit of Kenny Mack. Bryce and I were really excited about him last season. Obviously, some injuries and just not getting in the mix thereafter. But they ran him a lot in the first half, and he looked good. How's he been at camp that you've seen? And also, do you see them caring for running backs?
I do, because of special teams. And here's the two plays that are concerning for Kenny McIntosh at the number 3 running back spot. There was a blitz by a linebacker in the first half that was relatively easy pickup-wise. Now, the physicality of actually blocking a blitzing linebacker for a running back is different, but the actual recognition of it should have been pretty easy. And McIntosh whiffed on it, and that you have to make that block in the AB gap if you have a free blitzer. The offensive line is accounting for the front, and if you have anybody coming beyond the front guys, you've accounted for the back has to pick him up, and he did. George Holani, on the other hand, has consistently throughout training camp and even in the game on Saturday picked up blitzers, and not only picked them up but stoned them and blocked them. That's why George Holani is ahead of Kenny McIntosh right now for the number 3 running back job. Yeah, 8 carries, 40 yards for McIntosh. That's what everybody sees. They can read it on a piece of paper. I can tell you that the coaches in the film room double minus for that McIntosh failure to pick up a blitz, and that's where Holani is impressing the hell out of him. I asked McDonald yesterday about Holani's blocking, and he said, "Did you see the block he made on the run for 22 yards by D. Eskridge?" Loves his blocking. He called it the art of contact on that play. And for a no-nonsense coach like McDonald, that's music to his ears. He loves that stuff. He thought the best play Smith and Jigba had was blocking a safety into the secondary on another play earlier in the first half. So that's the stuff that McDonald's paying attention to, and you can bet that maybe that's Grubb and Scott Huff are paying attention to that too. So I think McIntosh has a ways to go. McDonald has brought it up. He's had a ways to go in his pass protection, his pass blocking, and that's why Holani, the undrafted rookie from Boise State, has the advantage right now. That would pretend 4 running backs, right? Because you're not going to cut Kenny McIntosh, or if you did cut him, you're going to get him back on the practice squad because he's going to clear waivers because he missed most of last season injured. So I think they're going to effectively have 4 running backs, whether 3 are on the active roster and McIntosh is on the practice squad ready to get called up for every game.
So kind of pivoting over to the defensive side here, Greg, the inside linebacker group. I heard in the press conference yesterday, and you kind of alluded to it earlier, about Tyrese Knight's kind of got some struggles, and McDonald alluded to that as a young player. But what's that rest of that group look like? Obviously, Radigan's now got the keel injury. Sounds like Drake Thomas is finally coming back, or he's off PUP. Is he actually a viable guy to be a inside linebacker, or is he more coming back to be a potential special teams player for this group? And what does the rest of that group look like, do you think, at the come down, maybe cut down day?
Well, I think Drake is going to be a special teams player because of how far he is behind in the installation of the defense. McDonald is gone. He's been going for weeks now in this installation and needs to get guys up to speed for it. Jerome Baker has missed a lot of it. He's had a hamstring issue. He's been out for a week plus now. He's been out for almost more than half of training camp at this point. Didn't play in the game and didn't even suit up at Los Angeles the other day. And that's why Tyrese Knight is playing. They had Knight play the entire game. He started and was still in the game at the end of the fourth quarter. And McDonald loves to – he is old school about how he talks about rookies. It's like initiation, really. I mentioned what he said about Murphy, and he need to get in shape to get through a whole practice, and the training camp wasn't starting well. Then Murphy, to me, was the best player on the field the other day. Right now it's going to be Terrell Dotson as the green dot and is going to call the plays, and he's back from injuries from the spring, and he's been number 1 every day in practice. Radigan's injury is a setback. He had 2 sacks in the first half against the Chargers. There were some run fit issues he had, but he knows the defense. He's really smart. West Point guy. Of course, he's smart. Those guys are really sharp. And he has the knowledge to carry out the defense and what McDonald wants to have him done. We don't know because Drake Thomas has been out for so long whether he has the ability to do that. Now he's got a 2-3 week ramp up to try to learn the defense inside there. So Tyrese Knight wasn't supposed to be a starter. He was going to learn. When they drafted him, the day they drafted him out of UTEP, they said he was going to be an outside linebacker until he learned the defense, and then they'll move him inside as a weak side inside guy later. Well, because of Baker being on, he's been injured for most of the spring and summer. Now all of a sudden, Tyrese Knight is your starter, and you can tell that McDonald wasn't ready for that, and that's an issue. And if Baker gets back, then it's less of an issue. But if Baker can't get back from this, they're going to have Tyrese Knight, and they're probably going to have to scheme some ways around that to try to take away teams that are going to target him. You can bet if Tyrese Knight is starting week 1, the Broncos are going to go right at him with run and pass and see if he can cover flats and fill a gap on run support.
Yeah, Greg, a lot was mentioned in the media and got national media attention about, the Seahawks getting pretty aggressive at practice, the 5 fights, whatever, that one day, and DK throwing the helmet. Um, is all is that stuff overblown in your opinion? I mean, that you fights break out all the time. Was it more of a DK focus because of, everyone's trying to pin stuff on him year in, year out? Um, or do you like sort of the aggressive toe in the line mentality that these guys are bringing, and is it a little different than, say, years past at camp with all that extracurricular?
Yeah, Ryan, it's totally different. And that day was the culmination of what had been going on for about a week. I mean, at the practice at Lumen Field Bryce was at, Marquise Blair picked up D. Eskridge and suplexed him to the ground. And the whole crowd went crazy. And McDonald didn't give a whip. He didn't care. He said, yeah, we've got to take care of each other, but that's football. That's the way it goes. He wants it. He wants the physicality. He wants them toeing the line, so we're going over the top. He just says, don't hurt each other. And when a coach says don't hurt each other, he's just basically saying fight smart. And he wants them to go at each other. That day, Metcalf got the attention because of his history on the field with extracurriculars. You're right. But Ryan, the start of that was Trey Brown. Trey Brown ripped Jake Bobo's helmet off and then gave him an uppercut. I mean, I'm talking Hearns and Hagler uppercut to his face with his helmet off, and it cut the bridge of his nose. And then DK Metcalf saw his fellow wide receiver bleeding on one knee with a trainer looking at him and was incensed. And he couldn't wait for his chance to go after Trey Brown. The Trey Brown-Bobo thing was actually a running play away from it, nowhere near where it wasn't a pass. It wasn't anywhere near their side of the field. And the Trey Brown-Metcalf helmet swing deal was also a running play away from the ball. Metcalf was ticked and sticking up for Bobo. But because of his history, it was DK Metcalf went off. But it was Trey Brown and Metcalf going at it well after the play, away from the ball, up near each other's faces, that got that going. So that was the significance of that day was the line was, and that was it. Taking off a helmet, and swinging at another guy, and taking off somebody else's helmet and bloody in their nose was the line, because that's the first. Turn the music off and berate smart. And he said, any more fighting, you're out of here. And then about 5 minutes later, in a one-on-one pass drill, Derek Hall and Christian Haynes were fighting after going way after the whistle, and McDonald ran over from another field and threw them both out of practice and sent them inside. That's the only time that's happened in training camp. And McDonald has really let them go quite a long ways. And Frank Clark fighting about 5 years ago in a training camp, the only time that it had been anything close to that practice. That was the most Legion of Boom era practice they've had in 10 years. I mean, I thought it was Richard Sherman in his first years of the league. Physical, and that's all because Mike McDonald wanted it to be that way.
Yeah, and real quick, because I mean, we love Trey. We just love his mentality, like when he first got drafted to this team. So to see his aggressiveness, you just love it. And yeah, right. And so really touch on it. I mean, he's forcing playing time really when the season starts, because obviously you got Witherspoon and Woolen seems like he's getting praise in a specific role, cover guy. How do you see it sort of playing out all together? Just is Trey forcing himself on the field, or is it pretty 1-2 there with Witherspoon and Woolen?
Yeah, they're going to go nickel quite a bit. I would guess 75, 80% of the time they're going to be a nickel. Last year in Baltimore, Mike McDonald was 79% nickel guy. They'll take a lineman out. I think when Jerome Baker comes on the field, his speed and ability to play the pass is going to keep him on the field along with Tyrell Dotson. So they'll go 2 linebackers and 5 defensive backs quite a bit. And then they'll have 2 down linemen with the edge rushers and Wosu and whoever they end up having is the other side. It's not Boye Mafe slam dunk every down right now. They even had Draymond Jones as a number 1 and outside linebacker yesterday standing up on the edge. They're testing Boye Mafe, who hasn't had done much in production-wise in any of the training camp drills, and especially on the one-on-one pass rushes drill. I haven't seen him win a one-on-one pass rush rep yet. So Witherspoon's the best player on the team, I think. So he's going to play, and he is the most influential in the nickel because of how he shuts down crossing routes and receivers and how he tackles for his size. Rare the nickels are that aggressive on dive plays and plays inside the tackles on the run, and he wants to stick his nose and shoulder pads in there to do it. So I think he's going to play. They're going to play nickel. They had him only in nickel in spring practices. Here in the summer, he's been working more in base outside, but I don't think they're going to be in just four defensive backs very, very much at all.
So, Greg, I got a two-part question for you here. In your opinion, because you've been there for all 15 training camp, what position groups have kind of really stood out, I would say? And then who could you see being some surprising cuts from this team that people may not think are potentially going to be guys that aren't going to make this roster?
Well, it's not a surprise that the best group on the field are the corners. And when they let plays go out and there are no sacks, the corners get a chance to shine. And Trey Brown has been fantastic. I've seen him make body up plays on DK Metcalf that a guy 5'10" and 190 pounds should not be doing. I mean, he gives up 6 inches and 45 pounds to Metcalf, and he's walling him off and boxing him out into the sideline of the end zone. He's done that multiple times in this camp to force incomplete passes or to force Metcalf to catch the ball out of bounds. Just exquisite body position. He jams him very hard at the line. It's a personal challenge every time Trey Brown lines up on DK Metcalf. Metcalf has made the entire secondary better. He's made Woolen better and more aggressive. Woolen was telling me he did a lot of weight training in the offseason to gain strength and size to do that kind of play. And Metcalf has challenged him. He's challenged Witherspoon, and he's made them all better. I think the best group on the team in training camp has been the defensive backs, and it's not even close. And I think that's the best group on the field, which is what they need to have 5 defensive backs on the field because it's your best group. Have the best players of your best group on the field as much as possible. Cuts-wise, I don't see a role for D. Eskridge. It may not surprise a lot of people, but it did surprise some that they even re-signed him and brought him back. But if Laviska Shenault is going to give you what he gave you in the Chargers game with the kickoff return and the ability to break tackles in this new kickoff being about breaking tackles because the coverage team is so close to you now, I think Chenault's going to be your kickoff returner. Then what role does D. Eskridge have in this offense? Fly sweep guy? You can bring in Chenault to do that. Yeah. So he's had 3 years now to produce, and he's had either injuries or not producing or off-field trouble with the 6-game suspension last year. I think they brought Eskridge back just in case Chenault wasn't ready for the task they're wanting to do, but I think Chenault's going to win that extra wide receiver job. I've thought for a couple of years Stone Forsythe's position on the team as a swing tackle was going to be in jeopardy, and especially after they signed George Fant this offseason. But Stone Forsythe has had a good camp. He started the game on Saturday in the Chargers at left tackle. He's been good in one-on-one pass rush drills against starters included. Against Nwosu, he's held his own. I've been pleasantly surprised with Stone Forsythe. Darrell Taylor, he's missed a lot of training camp with injury. He just came back yesterday. I think he's got ground to make up. Pete Carroll and his staff knew he'd been a 9-sack guy, so he had a cachet here, not to mention they drafted him in the second round, so they had a relationship with him. Mike McDonald and his staff doesn't know him from anybody. It's about production. What are you doing lately? And Darrell Taylor hasn't done anything lately because he's been missing half of training camp injured. I think he's got a long, long way to go to make the team.
Yeah, and guys like Derek Hall are looking good, and it just – that just seems like a point of strength, you look across that D line now, which is kind of refreshing since, like years past, you start throwing names out on this D line. You sort of forget guys when you're naming guys that are bring a lot of value. Like, Bryce and I were talking about the line and I'm like, oh yeah, Jaron Reed, or, oh yeah, there's so many guys that are, Derek Hall coming in the year two. To us, he looked good on Saturday in the preseason. What do you you're heading out pretty soon, going down to Tennessee. What do you expect out of these out of these joint practices? And also, are you a fan of joint practices?
Yeah, I expect fights. I expect
Excellent.
fines. I expect mayhem. I'd be very surprised if there aren't fights at these two practices. I'm expecting like throwing chairs, WWE. I wouldn't be surprised. I've been joking that I wouldn't be surprised if they already passed a hat around the Seahawks locker room to pay the fines that are going to be coming preemptively, just to raise money for them. You really think Jamal Adams is going to say nothing to DK Metcalf, and they're not going to push each other after a snap or 2 or 3 or 10 at these next two practices? Right. The coaches love this because you can control the level of that. And if it gets too out of, then they step in more than referees and officials can. They also love the fact that you can control the hits on quarterbacks like you can't in a preseason game, which is why Geno Smith's going to do these joint practices and not play in the preseason game so he doesn't get accidentally hit by somebody or inadvertently injured. I like him. I've done this for, it's how many years for the Seahawks now? 15 years, and they've never done it. The Raiders used to do it. When I covered the Raiders, they used to have joint practices with the Cowboys, and sometimes it was in El Paso, Texas even. It's a great breakup for the players. They really enjoy it. The media, the people that are watching the same two-team offense and defense hit each other for months, appreciates it. It's a refreshing thing. Going to Nashville, one of the best NFL cities there is in the league, that's not bad either. It's going to be 95 degrees with 80% humidity, but I'm looking forward to it. I'm in favor of it. Pete Carroll just never wanted to show how he practiced. That's why he never did it. And that made sense when they were winning and it was novel to the NFL. And then everybody started playing music and doing the fast-paced practices and having Will Ferrell and people at practice. And it wasn't so unique anymore. So there was no reason to be hiding Pete Carroll's stuff by the end of his regime here. So McDonald knows the Tennessee Titans staff. Denard Wilson, the defensive coordinator, was on the defensive staff of McDonald with the Ravens last year. That's how some of this came about. I'm really looking forward to it. I think it's going to be a really revealing and interesting couple of days.
So, Greg, just because we know you got to get on a flight and head on over to Tennessee, I got a kind of an odd question, but what's your prediction for this team now going? You've seen, training camp, the first preseason game. Obviously, there's a couple more in the roster still to shape up. Do you think at this point last year this is a better team going into the regular season as a potential to be a playoff team, or do you think they're on par with where they were last year?
They're a better team, Bryce, because they're coached better. They have a better defense. They have better defensive ideas. They're more innovative, and they have more potential to confuse offenses. Whether they do it or not, we'll see. But at this point, they are better just by their capability of what they have to unleash on an offense on the defensive side of the ball. Can they stop the run? Can they stop Christian McCaffrey and the San Francisco 49ers offensive line? We won't know that until week 6 on the Thursday night game in Lumen Field. I think their ceiling is still the wild card because I don't think they're nearly as good along the line of scrimmage as San Francisco is still. And I think when they play each other twice, the 49ers will dominate the offensive and defensive lines, and they'll win both games. And until they win the division, they're in the same place they've been for the last 10 years, right? Competing for a wild card spot, maybe stealing one playoff game, and then getting boat raced in the second round in Green Bay or Philadelphia or San Francisco, and they're just where they've been for the last 10 years. McDonald has the potential to get him past that. I'm not sure it's this year because of the offensive line in particular. Byron Murphy's going to be a stud, it looks like, in the defensive line, but they need a couple more Byron Murphys to compete with San Francisco this year. If the 49ers stay healthy, their line of scrimmage is still far superior to Seattle's, which keeps Seattle at least second, if not third, because they still have some team called the Rams that seems to do pretty well against them too.
Yeah, Greg, we really appreciate your time, and we also want to congratulate you on your show on KJR there. But before we let you go and you get on a flight there, why don't you let our viewers know what else you got going on and also the show. And yeah, I know you got a busy schedule, but let everyone know where they can find you and all your stuff.
I appreciate that. Yeah, thanks for the show too. I host now in KJR with Christopher Kidd, 10 a.m. to noon every weekday. I'll be broadcasting from Nashville starting tomorrow morning, Wednesday and Thursday and Friday for that matter. On Twitter, X, whatever the kids call it, at gbellseattle, and thenewstribune.com is where my stories are. But thanks, appreciate that. Thanks for the shout out, Ryan.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, like I said, Greg, we appreciate you. We know you got a busy schedule. It's awesome having you on this time of the year. Get your perspective. Obviously you're down there every day, so it's awesome stuff. So guys, make sure you go over and check out Greg's work. Appreciate it, Greg. Hope to have you on in the future.
Yeah, anytime. Thanks, Bryce. Thanks, Ryan. Take care, y'all.
Thanks, Greg. Have a good trip.
Thanks, Greg. Guys, that was Gregg Bell on the show. Second time around. I mean, I don't think the timing could have been better having Greg on. He's flying out probably under an hour now. He's heading to the airport. Just getting different perspectives. Like you and I talk about, everybody at home watch the game on Saturday. That was sort of the most that we really got to see. Okay. We were down at Lumen, took in a practice, but Greg's down there every day. So you see things. Hey, how's Sam? Well, this is how bad he's been looking at practice. Yeah, he is vanilla. The Chargers are, he's just brought up some points that you might see the TV and say, hey, pretty good. Maybe what's with all the criticism. So just to have Greg on, get his insight on really anything you want to know about the team was awesome today.
Yeah, no, for sure. It was awesome to have Greg on, especially with his just talking about the intensity and how Mike McDonald works at the practice and how that all comes together. And what he even said about Ryan Grubb and how different this offense really is from what we've seen, and how he said the big thing for him was JSN. He's not doing little bubbles behind the line of scrimmage. He is the vertical threat, which we always thought was DK, but clearly now in this offense, they're going to use JSN in a way we haven't seen him, except maybe for his days at Ohio State, if any of our listeners watched him back then when he was in college. But yeah, no, it was a really good breakdown. I really love talking to Greg about, what's going on. And I really strongly tell our listeners to go listen to his show on KJR with Christopher Kidd. I listen to it every day. He gives such great insight on what's going on with the Hawks. He's there at the practice. They have Ian Furness, who's another Hawks reporter, come on right after him. So if you want your Seahawks fix when it's, during the day, I highly tell you to go watch and listen to those shows by Gregg Bell on KJR.
Yeah, no, for sure, guys. And, the other thing that, when we talked about the intensity of practice and the fight, stuff like that, Greg loves it. He absolutely loves it, just like we love it. I mean, we talked about it and we thought how it carried over in the game. So, and that's the thing that, if you're a fan of the Hawks and you're watching it, don't be quick to kind of listen to the mainstream media, because they're gonna find they're finding selling points, right? DK is a selling point for the national media. He's a national guy, and then look, fights break out at practice all the time. But when you have it like that, and he talked about Trey Brown, the guy that really started it, you and I love Trey Brown because he's an absolute dog, and he's really stepping it up. And then Greg says he's having a hell of a camp. So he's going to be on the field a lot come this season, and but he's a guy kind of right in the middle of those fights. But we've talked about it. Greg touched on it. Mike loves that, and yeah, there's a line, but really the line is just don't injure the other guy. That's pretty much the line.
The other interesting comment, that Greg mentioned, and we talked about it on our post-game show, was the play of the McClendon Curtis and Stone Forsythe at tackle.
Right.
He says that Stone Forsythe's been doing great in camp in the one-on-ones against starters. So that's someone I've got circled now that I'm really going to be paying attention to in this Tennessee game is Stone Forsythe really, actually doing well? And maybe we just saw things where there was blocking assignment issues, like he was talking about Kenny Mack.
Right.
And that was the other one too.
Mm-hmm.
We looked at the running back and, position and how Kenny Mack ran the ball. And he comes in and Greg states that, hey, George Holani has quite a gap between him and Kenny Mack because of how assignment sound he is in pass protection, which, to be honest, that is a true thing. And that's something we've heard. We've seen ourselves when we were at Lumen is Kenny Mack does struggle in the pass pro. If you're going to have that third down roll or that third back roll, that's something that you kind of have to be solid in to make your, living, because Zach Charbonnet and Ken Walker are going to get the majority of those carries and those touches.
Yeah.
So when you do get yours, it's likely going to be in a pass situation where neither one of them are on the field and they're trying to give them a breather.
Yeah, and like you said, and it's not that I think you and I mentioned think you mentioned the Kenny Mack missed block on our post game, but like the one thing Gregg brings up is that he knows exactly what Mike loves. It's like we get the press conferences, right? But it's like he's like, favorite play from JSN is this block, favorite, so that obviously it's an important part of the game, especially at that third down passing down. But what does Mike really love? What really gets him going when he sees a player put their nose in there, and that's where you're going to see the playing time, right? It's that physical, hard nose. I don't care who you are or what name is on the back of your jersey. You got to play a certain style. You got to play a certain way when you're playing for me. So, and to have Gregg sort of just reiterate, hey, no, this is what really gets my going. I'm talking to him a lot all the time. We're just down there. It's awesome, man. So yeah, just overall, just awesome. Just an awesome talk here with Gregg today. And like you just mentioned, guys, go check out Gregg's show, KJR. Follow him on all the platforms because he's been doing it for years with this team. So he knows this team inside and out. So,
and the one thing I will say, guys, the reason why I like following Gregg and we love having him on our show is Gregg is not going to sugarcoat things.
Yeah.
He is going to tell you exactly how it is and his opinion on things. And that's what's so great about talking to Gregg Bell is you're not going to get, stuff that's trying to, like Ryan talked about, how the national media will paint things a certain way. Gregg Bell will tell you exactly how it is. And that's why we strongly have him on our show and we listen to what Gregg's got to say when it comes to this team.
Yeah, no, you said it. You said it right. So guys, that's it for us. We got some other good stuff coming up. So make sure you go down, subscribe to the channel. And of course, keep it locked too, because we're bringing in the live post games after every game. It's just getting rolling, man. Like we're just getting so close. I mean, it's mid-August here, so yeah, we're gonna one of these preseason games are gonna fly by, and then it's showtime. So that's that's it for us. Go Hawks.
Go Hawks.